Where history's shadows cast long, unsettling doubts, the truth lies buried. From cryptic wartime codes to assassinations that scarred generations, unearth the secrets the world tried to forget. Hosts Tim Gardner and Eli Frame guide you through a labyrinth of unanswered questions, where every clue pulses with danger and intrigue, and perhaps an opinion or two. It's not all facts because history never is. Welcome to the Ciphered Past.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Ciphered Past, episode 30. We are definitely honored to have a certain guest on today, and we'll introduce her in just a moment. But Eli, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to branch out a little bit from what we normally speak about. So narrow-mindedly here.
Yeah, we're definitely honored and excited for episode 30. And just to give you a little bit of insight on our guest, it's so Lisa Pease is a respected author, historian, and researcher whose work has significantly shaped modern discussions surrounding political assassinations, intelligence operations, and the unresolved questions of the 1960s. While widely recognized for her landmark book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, on the assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, Lisa's research extends deeply into broader political and intelligence climate that also surrounds the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Her work consistently explores the intersections of covert operations, media influence, investigative limitations, and the ways official narratives are constructed and sustained. Through careful analysis of primary sources, witness testimony, and historical context, she has helped illuminate how the assassination of President Kennedy cannot be examined in isolation, but must be understood within the larger framework of Cold War tensions, intelligence activity, and domestic political conflict. Lisa's voice remains especially important today as newly released records, ongoing research, and evolving scholarship continue to reshape how the Kennedy assassination is understood by both researchers and the public. Lisa Pease, it's truly an honor to have you on our show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I want to make clear, I didn't write that. Well. I said, people think we write our own introductions. I did not write that.
Well, we're just, we're pleased to have you on. So thank you so much. But so Lisa, how's this winter been treating you so far? We heard that I know that the East Coast, because I'm based out on the West Coast. Eli's based out in Florida. You're based out somewhere out on the East Coast,
South Carolina.
Yeah. I heard it's getting pretty a lot of snow and cold out there. I hope you're staying safe.
Yes. I retired. I bought a little home here, and I'm heading to Florida as soon as I can because I'm sick of this cold weather.
Well, let me know what you do if you're nearby.
Yeah. Eli's based out of Naples, right? So
yeah, I'm down in Naples.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's where Sean Stone lives. Oliver Stone's son is.
Oh, is it? Cool. It's also where Mark Adamczyk, who's on Chokeholds. Yeah.
Yes. And Jim DiEugenio almost bought a home there, and then there was a storm that damaged the home he was going to buy, so he decided not to move to Florida.
Yeah, probably good timing. We've had a couple storms since I've been down here. It's a little dicey, but
it's so pretty. Yeah, I'm heading down next month for the launch of the Artemis 2. The next
cool.
launch window is the start of April, and I really want to see people go to the moon for the first or second or fifth time, or however many times it is.
That'll be really cool.
And what people believe, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, it's an honor to be on, have you on our show. This is kind of a landmark for us, episode 32. We're kind of a new start out show, so it's to have you on. We're just really, really excited. So thanks again. So anyhow, so let's just go ahead and get a little bit of background from you, just obviously without the with the intro that we just gave, but with Kennedy assassination just in general, and we'll get into the main questions here in just a moment. But I understand that on January 6th, there were some files actually released. I know that you said when I talked to you off air that you were going to be looking into them, but your thought process and how secretive that they released those files. They made no mention of it. It was actually the same day as the Epstein files were released.
There might be some interesting stuff in them then, frankly.
Yeah.
The quieter the release, the more interesting the files in general. So, I have not had time to look into them yet, but I will eventually. There's so much now to read, and how do I want to say? There's no real index, so it is like sifting through a haystack, and it has kind of been that way most of the time for me. I definitely had some good books at the start to guide me as I was getting into this. I had been working on Jerry Brown's presidential campaign in 1992 when I first picked up a couple of books on the Kennedy assassination, because I saw how bad the media was in reporting what was happening right in front of me at various campaign events. I mean, in those days, it's hard to explain now because you see the huge Trump rallies and, the Obama rallies and the Bernie Sanders rallies. But in those days, if you got a couple hundred people to an event, that was a big crowd. If you got 3,000, you were a rock star. And Jerry Brown was like routinely pulling in 3,000, and it was routinely reported as a handful of supporters. And so that really bothered me. It was clear to me the media had a terrible agenda that was not about truth telling. And this is before I got into the Kennedy assassination. So after the campaign ended, I'm like, if they're that wrong about this, what else might they have been wrong about? And right about then, I wandered into some garage sale that had a couple books on the Kennedy assassination, and I picked them up. They were Jim Garrison's book on the trail of the assassins and Plausible Denial by Mark Lane. And I'm pretty sure I read Plausible Denial first. And he opens by talking about a media asset of the CIA's who had written about Oswald, and that was Priscilla Johnson McMillan. And she had interviewed Oswald when he was supposedly defecting to the Soviet Union prior to the assassination. And then she'd written about him again after the assassination, and in fact had befriended Marina and cozied up to her and wrote a book that Marina later labeled A Pack of Lies. So it made instant sense to me. If the CIA had killed Kennedy and they had these media assets, then of course it makes sense that the truth never really came out, because the media people are always there to lead you astray or to say it isn't true or to focus your attention elsewhere. And I thought, no wonder they got away with this. And I was also getting involved in fairness and accuracy in reporting. And we would sit and discuss the media events of the day. And I started to pay attention to bylines, something I'd never done before. But as I was reading the newspaper, we would bring in like stories that really seemed like outliers, like they were probably false. And we would discuss them. And one woman's name came up a lot, Robin Wright. And so sure enough, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I know Robin Wright is going to write the story about this, and it's going to be a cover story. And it's going to say, now we need the CIA more than ever, which is basically exactly what happened, except she had two co-authors that I didn't anticipate. But if you follow the news carefully, you will see patterns. You will see the people who are always defending the CIA at every turn. It's like Chris Matthews, whenever he was on TV, he would always find a way to say Oswald did it, like he was paid a bonus every time he managed to work that into a show. It was so bizarre, the context he would inject that into. And I thought, he has to be a CIA asset. There's no other explanation for that. No person would do that. It makes him look dumb, you know. But you know, so there you go.
Wow.
That's interesting. So, you know, as Tim and I have, you know, read your work and look up to you as, you know, one of the veterans of the space, it's funny, or it's interesting to hear, you know, that there was one day when you didn't know anything about it and you waltzed into a garage sale and picked up a couple books. But I wanted to ask
you somewhere.
Exactly.
And those are two good places to start. So those are two great books. You wrote an article recently about the latest releases, specifically on Sirhan's CIA report, or CIA file, excuse me. And I believe there'll be in follow-up installments, right?
Yes, now that I'm retired as of yesterday, I will. I have 2
congratulations
more for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure I'd make it that far, but I did. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, I have 2 more articles planned, and then I go back into the research to see what else is there. So,
Okay.
but yeah, that article I wrote about, it had long been a question to me because it was very obvious to me that the CIA killed both Kennedys, and it was obvious that the CIA was involved in the LAPD investigation, and it was equally obvious that it was completely covered up, the CIA's involvement in the in the investigation. So my question was, did the LAPD invite the CIA into the investigation, or did the CIA force their way in? And the newly released files show the CIA kind of, you know, forced their way in and told the LAPD, "You're going to need us." And then the LAPD quickly realized, yeah, we might need them. And of course, you know, the innocent explanation is, well, Sirhan was a foreigner, and, you know, obviously they need the CIA to go into the Middle East background. I mean, there's always an innocent explanation for this stuff. But the fact that it was Angleton's team that picked up the liaison immediately, like as soon as the assassination happened, I found just fascinating because, of course, it was Angleton's team that controlled Lee Harvey Oswald's file for 4 years before the assassination, and then handed it off just months before to the operations, you know, group that was, you know, probably using him. So anyway, I know you have a bunch of other questions.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I do find that and again, we will get to those, but that you just mentioned that brilliantly, is that it seems like the most obvious, like, important answers are pretty simple, right? I feel like when I've looked at certain things, like, you know, the Dallas PD, right? So, like, for example, we had a guest on the other night who pointed out that Jack Ruby had a hood over, or like had a bag over his head after he shot Oswald. That is amazing, like how they would come up with like a bag, right? Randomly to put over his head when you know, I mean, there's just certain things that are like, either they're circumstances that are really silly, but you know, I mean, even Captain Fritz looking at Jack Ruby when he's walking out, there's just a lot of different things that surround everything on this. And I think you just mentioned that brilliantly about like how things are pretty simple, but yet, in my opinion, pretty funny at the same time. Not funny in a context of like,
no, I understand. Yeah.
Right. So, but so when you examined the assassination of President Kennedy, how important was it to understand the broader Cold War intelligence environment rather than viewing the event strictly as an isolated act?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny. That goes right back to the garage sale, because as I read Garrison's book, he kept talking about like all this Cold War history I didn't know anything about. And I'm like, is that true? Did that happen? A U-2 fell? You know, I can't emphasize how little I knew about history when I got into this. And I realized right away, like I said, that, you know, it seemed obvious to me that only the CIA would have the power to pull off something like that. So I was obviously focused on the CIA early on, and I just started reading books on the history of the CIA. And the more I read, the more I realized, like, my whole understanding of contemporary history was BS, basically. I mean, at the time of the Kennedy assassination, the public did not know that the CIA had worked with the British to overthrow the Shah of Iran. That was not popular common knowledge. They did not know the CIA had effected the coup in Guatemala. That was not taught in school. And so the public, what little they knew of the CIA was whatever rah-rah promotional materials, filtered through to them. And, or they had some family member who was in the CIA. And, during World War II, it seemed like almost everybody was in the CIA. If you were intelligent at all, you were probably working for the intelligence services. It was huge how many people were actually in that pool. But yeah, the more I understood it, the more I saw how we overthrew leaders of other countries, then I could recognize the patterns in the overthrow of Kennedy. Because in fact, in the 60s, there's a great chapter, and I've got a book right here. This book is so good. I actually think it's the best book on the Kennedy assassination that isn't about the Kennedy assassination. It's called Thy Will Be Done. It's now published by the, what is that, Hidden History, because it's out of print. But they have a chapter in there, or a section called Lining Up the Hemisphere, where they go through like all the leftist leaders that were taken out by the CIA in a relatively short period. And the conclusion to me is that if Kennedy weren't killed by the CIA, that would be a glaring anomaly, because he was perceived as a leftist because he was trying to work for a genuine peace with the Soviets at a time where confronting the Soviets was kind of the primary cash cow of the intelligence community. All the prestigious assignments were the ones fighting the Soviets and, opposing communism, which was really more about opposing closed markets that communism proposed, and opposing anything that would mean more money for the ordinary man or less money for the rich oil barons, so
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times it seems, you mentioned the Shah of Iran or, Patrice Lumumba. A lot of these, it seemed like the argument of communism encroaching is just a front for, or Guatemala, right? So you have a leftist in America leader, right? But we're not talking about a total pawn of the Soviets. Even Castro, when he first came to power, now we can speculate about whether he was secretly a communist the whole time, but there were certainly overtures made to the U.S., which were blown off. And you're going to go somewhere where if you need help, you're going to go to one of the people handing out money. But it seemed like kind of a scam for a lot of the times. Just United Fruit needs to get back into, or needs to have more access in Guatemala. Okay, looks like a communist, smells like a communist. Let's take him out.
Right. The red threat was so hyped in the media in the 50s that it was just a convenient excuse for every coup that they did, no matter how true or false it was about the leader being in bed with the Soviets. Most of them weren't. In Latin America, they weren't. But nationalists were seen in the same context as Soviet supporters. If somebody didn't want to be our slave, they were an enemy. And that's horrible. That's just horrible. And I think that's why JFK's death resonates so much around the world, because the rest of the world saw what happened when an American president said, I don't want a Pax Americana. I don't want an American-led peace. I want genuine peace with neighbors, countries acting as neighbors and helping each other and treating each other with respect. It was unprecedented. And again, I didn't realize what an anomaly JFK was as a president relative to all the other presidents before and since. We've had better and worse presidents in various areas, but we've had no one even close to him when it came to really respecting the rights of other nations. I've never seen any other president have that foreign policy.
So in your view, what is the most misunderstood aspect of the JFK assassination, especially with the public and newer viewers? I know you talked about a mockingbird aspect earlier, but with the CIA, but you know, it seems like the public facade is, and like how I was a child, I learned from the history books it was a lone gunman in Oswald. You typically get that picture painted, but for the newer researcher that's going into this and kind of questioning things and like is looking at all theories. I mean, what's your
I would
suggestion?
say start with the fact that Oswald didn't do it. And I am
Right.
shocked how many researchers who openly acknowledge conspiracy and think the CIA were involved never bothered to figure out if Oswald actually fired those shots.
Right.
And you don't have to go any further than another book on my shelf, the Warren Commission volumes. Cortland Cunningham, FBI agent, testified to the Warren Commission. And they were trying to prove that Oswald had fired the rifle. And so they did a rifle test, the FBI did. Well, guess what happened? Now, this part's not there. This shows up in Breach of Faith. But the FBI agent who fired Oswald's rifle got so much nitrate on his cheek. It was literally on both cheeks. And Oswald had no nitrate on his cheeks. Now, when you fire a rifle, the little particles are so small, you can't even wash them off. That's why a nitrate test is actually a good test in that sense. If there is any nitrate present, it could indicate a gun was fired. Now, the problem with the test is it could also indicate you were handling cardboard boxes, like Oswald was at the book depository. But most people don't put that up to their cheek. So nitrate on the cheek is kind of the key. If the rifle was fired by Oswald, he would have had nitrate on his cheek. The fact that his cheeks came out clean indicated that he didn't. So what Cortland Cunningham told the Warren Commission is, well, we staged a test where we had one guy fire one shot and then hand the rifle to a second guy who cleaned the gun and then handed it back to the first guy, fired another shot, and then handed it over and got it cleaned. And they did that 3 times. And that way the guy had no nitrate on his cheek. I'm like, well, first of all, Oswald wouldn't have had that much time. And second of all, that would have been a conspiracy that Oswald had a gun cleaner standing right next to him. So why would they do that? And of course, they're just grabbing at straws. Anything to say that the fact that Oswald's cheeks were clean didn't mean anything, but it means everything. You know, it completely exonerates Oswald. And I think it's really important to start there because you lose credibility with me and with other researchers if you say, well, it doesn't matter if Oswald fired or not. Well, actually, it really does. And he's a person. He has family. He still has daughters alive. You know, it's like, it's not fair to blame this huge turning point in history on a guy who provably didn't do it. So I think that's important. And it's also equally important to understand he was working with the CIA. He was probably a singleton that Angleton ran as what they call a vest pocket operation. Angleton was known to run like individual agents, not through the formal chain of command, because there are desk officers and handlers and things like that. Angleton just ran some of his own people, and it's very likely that Oswald was somebody that Angleton had handpicked to go to the Soviet Union because Angleton was trying to prove there was a mole in the U-2 program. So who better to send than a U-2 expert and see who bit? Because if they didn't have a mole, they would descend all over Oswald and try and befriend him and get info out of him. If they avoided Oswald, it's because they didn't need his information because they did have a mole. And of course, that's basically what happened. The Soviets saw this guy as a CIA agent coming a mile away. He's talking loudly to the known microphones in the wall at the American consulate in Moscow, saying, oh, I have something of special interest to share. It's like he's basically saying, come and find me. I'm going to tell you secrets. And the fact that he's doing that in front of a guy who's actually a CIA officer himself, I forget the guy's name, but the guy who sat and briefed him basically in the Soviet embassy. In fact, that was in one of the most recent file releases that guy really did work for the CIA. It's been hinted at and long suspected, but it's right out there in the recent file release. So the Soviets aren't stupid.
Yeah.
And but the CIA was very mad that they didn't fall for Oswald, and they kind of didn't believe they didn't fall for Oswald. So yeah. Anyway.
Well, and quick note, Eli, before I cut in, but I always find it how interesting him and Marina were able to get back into the United States so easily during a Cold War like level. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
but
He thought he could get a military hop home, and I half wonder if he did. I don't remember seeing which flights or manifests, he came back on, but
right.
he openly talked about that. If he had really defected to the Soviet Union and given up secrets, there's no way the military would let him on a plane, right? And of course, there he was as a Marine playing Russian operas and talking pro-communism in the army. I mean, in the military in the 50s at the height of the Red Scare. There's no way they didn't all assume he was working for the CIA. There's
Right.
just no way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there was Jim Botello, I think his name is, who was one of his roommates and became a judge later, I believe. He had an interesting interview where he said, yeah, once Oswald resurfaced in Moscow, I knew, or I pretty much knew that he was intelligence. Like,
yeah,
right, this is just not really feasible.
And we sent like 15 defectors into the Soviet Union, all from the military. Again, the Soviets are dumb. They could see this coming a mile away. One of them, William, I don't know if that's his first name, Webster, Robert Webster. I forget his first name, but the last name is Webster. He dated Marina. It's like they were both targeting Marina. She was the son of a KGB she was the daughter, the niece. She had a KGB uncle, is what I'm trying to say. And that would have been of interest to the CIA, lure her over and maybe get her to bring her uncle over or something. So, yeah, I think the whole thing is so much simpler than people make it out to be. And of course, it wasn't simple in the beginning. I mean, I benefit from all the research of everybody who came before me, and people like Jim Garrison, who did his own investigation, and the people who wrote all these wonderful books on the CIA. All of that stuff fed into me. But bottom line, like I said, Oswald couldn't have done it. So if Oswald couldn't do it, not only like I said, so easily provable. So that means the press is in on it. And that means the mob couldn't have done it because the mob doesn't control the national media. In fact, only one group controls the national media, and that's the CIA. And Carl Bernstein wrote about this in Rolling Stone in 1977 and had a 16-page article I used to copy and hand out to people like candy. It's like, you have to read this.
Yeah.
Because it's an important article. He talks about how CBS was the CIA's biggest media asset, second only to the New York Times. And of course, we see now the New York Times is calling for war against Iran. So much for a president that's going to fight the deep state. He is the deep state. He's the head of the deep state.
Yeah. And when we found that out with the Epstein files and all this other stuff recently too, I mean, probably even before, but I mean, specifically, like, just, I don't want to get off base too much, but I agree with you 100%. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's interesting that CBS, of course, was Dan Rather. And so Dan Rather's career was made by basically lying about what he saw in the Zapruder film. He saw that film like the day after it happened and described that Kennedy's head went violently forward at the moment of the shot, from supposedly behind. Well, we've seen the film now. There's no moment where Kennedy's head goes violently forward. It goes violently backward and to the left, as Oliver Stone made very clear in his film, which is fact-based. So, people praise Dan Rather. Oh, I miss the journalists of old like Dan Rather. It's like, that guy was a liar from the start. And then you have C.D. Jackson, who's working for the CIA, but also working for Time Life, who managed to buy the Zapruder film and lock it away. It's not part of the official investigation. There's no public scrutiny of it. It's literally kept from the public until 1975.
Wow.
It's just, but these are all CIA media people working around the edges. And Ankleton, according to Carl Bernstein, ran his own group of media assets. So you have to wonder, which ones were his. I don't know. Mhm.
Working for the LAPD, how's he just leave for weeks or months at a time and get trained and work with the CIA and then show back up? And then, of course, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but is in charge of Special Unit Center or Special Operations Center, where rights of the investigation into RFK's death.
Well, he's in charge of the conspiracy aspect of the investigation because Captain Brown is in charge of SUS, and Captain Brown is the one interfacing with the CIA on a regular basis and not putting that in the record, except for one slip up. And that was my first clue, where he talks about getting information or having a phone call with Goliath. And Goliath was the code name that the police used when they were referring to the CIA. And that was all over the country, they would call it Goliath. So that also kind of, what a code name, right? If it was a tiny little, flunky agency, you wouldn't call it Goliath, right?
Right. But you see this infiltration sort of all over. I mean, you got the police here and you have the media.
Mhm.
I would assume it's all over the place when you have folks leaving and coming, and you just create this shared interest
And then
to
it's
your
the
friends, to your
scientific
trainers.
field. There's like forbidden science because it's like CIA technology where, you run into those patents and people descend on you. You can't pursue that area of research, chemical warfare stuff that they've been investigating. And then there's academia. I mean, the CIA had a whole branch targeting academics to make sure they weren't going to like tell real history, that they would tell the CIA's version of history, which is how you keep the Kennedy assassination and every other operation that they did out of your textbooks. It's just shocking. But yeah, I think it was the media that made talking about like the Kennedy assassination as if it was a conspiracy. You're both old enough to remember 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And all the media afterwards, anyone who says this was like a government conspiracy is just a nutcase and this, that. And it was so shoved down our throats like, this is a thought you are not allowed to have in this country, basically. That's what they did with the JFK case originally. And we weren't subject to it because I think all of us were born, or not old enough at the time of it to understand what was really going on. But when I talk to older people and adults to this day, some of them like back away and like, ooh, like that's, you just don't talk about that.
Yeah.
It brought a level of fear to people. Very interesting. And witnesses in the RFK assassination were so terrified by the police. The police went to them and said, "You can't ever talk about this ever to anyone." And that wasn't true. There was a judge order that they couldn't discuss it with the media before the trial had happened. But after the trial, that order was lifted. But there are witnesses I ran into, 30 years later that were still terrified and would talk to me almost in whispers, like they were so afraid of somebody running in and arresting them for even talking to me. That's how visceral and emotional they work, these people. It's really frightening.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing the story with our viewers who may not be familiar with it, of Sandra Serrano, just high level, and I believe, didn't she also, after the scene with Hank Hernandez, is that his name?
Yes.
But didn't she for a number of years continue to see him at various events? That might have been a different witness.
No,
But
that was her. That I think she had. Yeah, that it was like he was shadowing her, like
right.
there in her
Did you
life to
speak with her?
remind her not to
Meet with her?
talk. Yeah, Sandy Serrano was a volunteer for the RFK campaign when it was in Los Angeles. She had helped lead a bunch of volunteers. She was very young. She was 20, um, Hispanic, and she was sitting on a back fire escape. The hotel was like 2 levels, and it's funny because the top level, and I don't mean top because actually it had many floors beyond that, but there were 2 ground floor levels that sat above each other, because to the east, the ground floor level was the second floor. To the north, the ground floor level was the first floor. Anyway, so she's sitting off the second floor ground level on the top of a fire escape in the back of the hotel. And as she's sitting there, and Kennedy's about to come down to speak, it's almost midnight, and 3 people walk up past her, and she remembered them because the girl had a dress like a friend of hers had. And so the dress caught her attention immediately. It was a white dress with dark polka dots. And the girl had a turned up, funny ski slope sort of nose, Bob Hope nose, as she described it, and uh, and then her two companions looked Hispanic or at least dark haired, bushy haired, and one had a gold sweater on. She's like autumn gold, not like shiny gold, but kind of a butterscotch color, if you will. And then the other was like in blue jeans. And all three of them walked past her, stepped over, went into the hotel. About 20 minutes later, she thought she heard six backfires from a car. And then all of a sudden, two of the three come flying back out and, run right past her. And the girl is yelling, "We shot him! We shot him!" And Sandy says, "Who did you shoot?" And she said, "Senator Kennedy," kind of like, "Ha ha ha," and keeps running into the darkness. And there's a parking lot back there. So they ran right into that back parking lot and disappeared. And Sandy didn't know what to believe. And so she went downstairs and it's like, "Was somebody shot?" And people like, "No," because they hadn't heard yet. And she went back up or actually, then she went into a phone booth and called her mother. It's like, "Was somebody shot?" And then her mother is all like confused, I think, because it had just happened on TV and, was trying to piece it together. And then she finally goes back up and manages to talk to a guy who ends up being like an assistant district attorney, and he finds her totally credible, so he puts her aside with the other witnesses, and she talks for like 30 seconds or less to Vince DiPiero. I interviewed him, and he's like, "Honestly, we probably said one sentence to each other, you saw the girl, yeah, I saw her too," or something like that. And that was about it. And then they were quickly separated because witnesses aren't supposed to contaminate each other. Later, the police would say, each made it up and the other picked it up from them. But they couldn't figure out who came up with the story first. Anyway, they both came up with it separately. So Sandra Van Oker then finds her and he puts her on TV and she's like, "Yeah, I saw this, story and the girl and, running out and saying, 'We shot him, we shot him.'" And the police obviously did not like that because that completely opens the door to a big conspiracy. And so they basically shut her down and they interview her a few times. She's very consistent with her story. The FBI interviews her. She tells them the same story. She's very credible. She can point to where she sat and all that. So what does the LAPD do? First of all, they take a picture of her on the wrong set of stairs for posterity. So if people later look, they'll have her on the wrong side of the building. It's like, why would you do that if you're not trying to hide something? And she was literally in tears the day they did that shoot, because she knew there was a cover up in process and didn't know what to do about it. But anyway, so Hank Hernandez, who with Manny Pena were the two running the conspiracy aspect of the LAPD's investigation. There were different teams. One team was like looking into the rifle and ballistics, and another team doing this, another team on the medical stuff, but they were the conspiracy team. And so anyway, Hank Hernandez tries to talk to Sandy. She doesn't want to talk to him alone. She talks her aunt into coming with her. He's like, "I'll take you out for a steak dinner." He's super nice to them. He gives her wine, even though she's underage in California at that point in time. And they have a nice dinner. Now it's like 10 p.m. at night, and they're driving back to the station. And he goes, "I want to bring her in and put her on the lie detector." And Sandy's like, "No." And the aunt is like, "Oh, that's okay," because she thinks the cop is a nice guy and she trusts him. And they both kind of trust the police. And so Sandy ends up going in there alone, strapped to the machine. He starts asking her questions. She's smart. She tricks him and like lies about something small. And of course, he doesn't pick it up because he's not. The lie detector really doesn't detect lies. It intimidates witnesses. That's its primary benefit. It can detect stress, but that can come from telling the truth or a lie. Anyway, so she's confident that it doesn't matter what she says because he can't read the machine anyway. But he keeps trying to get her to change her story. And he's really insistent. He's like, "No, Sandy, no. You didn't hear her say, 'We shot Kennedy.' She said, 'They shot Kennedy,' right?" And then he's like, "Sandy, Sandy, if you love the Kennedys, you will not say this. You're making this into a conspiracy. And I have all these other girls who said something similar, but they all recanted and admitted they were lying. You need to do the same. And it's like psychological warfare. I mean, I read this thing and I would have to get up every few seconds and kind of stomp around the room because I was getting so angry at what he was doing to her. It was clearly psychological warfare, clearly. And he runs his kind of full script, gets to the end, doesn't get the desired result. So he kind of starts at the top and starts, running the script again. And now she's getting annoyed because she's like, I already told you, I answered that. I really saw them. That's what she said. And anyway, this goes on for again another couple hours, and Sandy finally realizes she's never going home that night until she says something different. And so she finally says what he wants, and then it gets very quiet, and you can hear her say something like "Let me out" or something. It's like she's done. She'll say whatever. And she says that to him. It's like, what do you want me to say? He's like, no, it has to be your words. And she's like, well, just tell me. Clearly, you're looking for something, and you're not accepting what I'm saying. So, what do you want me to say? Anyway, it's just and but then that became it on all the files that it said. Polka dot dress story phony. Sandra retracted. Blah blah blah. And that became their excuse to ignore everything about the polka dot dress. And then, of course, they surfaced a girl in a green dress with yellow lemons of varying sizes and say she was the girl in the polka dot dress. Even though she couldn't have run anywhere because she was in a cast. She had a broken leg that day. It's like it couldn't have been her. And anyway, yeah, it's an amazing and frightening story because the police can be very intimidating.
Yeah, I was amazed in reading that, just how brave Sandy Serrano was.
Yes, she held up for almost 3 full sessions. Yeah.
Regardless of breaking down at the end, that's what I assume anybody would do. But
yeah,
she was really giving it back to him there for it seemed like a long time. So
yeah. No, she's kind of a hero in that story. And of course, years later, I found there was somebody also on those stairs who heard the same conversation, reported the same thing. A little 13-year-old named Kathy Keir, who was there with her friends. And she said, yeah, we were making fun of them because most people in those days really dressed up for a political event like that. It was a formal event. And these people were not formally dressed. It was kind of a house dress that the girl in the polka dot dress was wearing, not a fancy dress. And, jeans, you don't wear jeans to a fancy event at the Ambassador Hotel. And so she and her friends had been making fun of these people. And then when they ran out, she heard the same thing and told the police the same thing, that the girl had said, we shot him. And the police went to her mother and said, it's a crime to lie to an officer, And the FBI came and, and her parents, I'm sure, pressured her to say, and she's like, well, maybe they said they shot him. I mean, she was young, she didn't know. But I talked to her years later and she said, hey, whatever I said first was the truth. She's like, I don't remember now what happened, but whatever I said first, that's what you should go with. And that's what she said. Yeah.
Wow.
You're watching Ciphered Past. We're with a respected historian, researcher, and author of the landmark book, A Lie Too Big to Fail. You can pick that up on Amazon.com or where you get your books at. Lisa Pease. It's interesting that you mentioned the CIA's influence on the Robert Kennedy case. It kind of reminds me of the same thing with the Dallas Police Department and Aquila Clemens, and how she was interviewed by Mark Lane, and she described two men who killed J.D. Tippit. And then, of course, you had Croy and Westbrook that got involved with it, and we know the story that goes on with that. So my question to you is like, how deep do you feel like the CIA penetrated inside of the Dallas Police Department and the sheriff's office?
Well, the mayor at that time was a former CIA officer himself, right? Mayor Earl Cabell. His brother had been fired by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, Charles Cabell. So if you've got the mayor and, you kind of got the police department by the balls, and I'm sure they had people inside. because after World War II, a lot of these guys, these intelligence officers, they had to go back to some sort of civilian life. A lot of them went into police forces around the country. In fact, they had their own organization. I think the initials were LEAA, and I forget what it stands for, but it was a loose association of kind of like former CIA people who went into the police department, and they all kept in touch with each other. And so, yeah, they wouldn't have killed JFK or RFK in a city where they didn't control the police force, where they didn't have somebody in place. They just wouldn't. I mean, that'd just be dumb. Don't want to expose yourself. It was all about controlling the narrative and controlling the cover up, because then it didn't matter what the actual evidence showed. If you could control the police, if you could control the media, you could get away with anything. And I think often of these mass shootings today, the Las Vegas shooting, or, school shootings, or, there have been several at Virginia Tech, which is right there on the outskirts of Langley. It's like, I think these are all mind control operations. I think these are CIA ops that may serve a purpose we will never understand. It might even be a signal to some counterpart in Iran. Hey, if a big event happens tomorrow, we did that, or something, and we got away with it. And you'll notice the media covers for us. And when we overthrow your leader, they'll cover for us too, or whatever. I don't know. It might be, some way of sending a message. Or if we could pull that off and get away with it, imagine what we could do in your country.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, to add off that question that I had is that, do you think that they were trying to send a global message by the assassination of President Kennedy?
I think they were more concerned with just stopping him, because he was making friends around the world. He was wildly popular. There's more statues of him around the world than any other U.S. president. I mean, everybody loved Kennedy, and it wasn't just because of his good looks or whatever. It's because he was really trying to help the ordinary person, and other countries saw it. And most other countries just accept it as a conspiracy. They've never questioned that it was a conspiracy. It's only in the U.S. because we're so brainwashed, and our schools and the books that kids read growing up and stuff, and they're all taught the same thing. And that's why I think the important starting point is Oswald didn't do it, because that helps get you over that hurdle. It's like, now I'm in the opposition group. You could try and waffle and say, well, I don't care if Oswald did it or not. I mean, I did that at first. It's like, doesn't matter if he did it or not. What matters is who set him up, who was behind him if he did it. But it does matter. And like I said, once he didn't do it, to me, that's also the key to whether we've overcome this yet or not. And we haven't, until the media in this country stops saying Oswald did it and starts saying it's clear now that Oswald didn't do it. And I don't care if they say, well, maybe we'll never know for sure who did do it, but we can say for certain who didn't do it. That day will be a really good day in America, because then we will know the media is finally ready to tell the truth about at least that much of our history.
Absolutely.
We've asked a number of our guests this, including Bart Camp earlier this week, or was that the end of last week? But you remind me, if this were to come out tomorrow that Oswald didn't do it, and since some bit of the truth were to come out, let's say, that it was a conspiracy involving members of the government, do you think it would get swept through the news cycle in 24 hours and we would be on to the next thing? And, to me, it's that's a revolutionary moment, right? In terms of the people rising up.
Yeah.
But I
think they would hurry through that story as fast as they could.
Yeah.
Because there've been little moments like that. Little cracks have come up, or, you have Dan Hardway, who investigated for the HSCA, going before Congress saying, look, we know the CIA did this. What are you going to do about it? And the media just ignores that, And the other thing is, not only is the media still in bed with the CIA, the media doesn't ever want to admit they could be that wrong, because then who's going to trust them now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of have a vested interest in keeping with the established story. Mm-hmm. And again, this also goes to academia. When kids are in journalism school, I bet you anything that the Kennedy assassination comes up as like something not to believe in, and these crazy conspiracy theorists. And, because I hear all the journalists kind of parrot the same points. And I hear them parrot the points from the CIA's own memo during the Garrison investigation. And this was a document I remember the first time I read it, I'm like, I can't believe more people aren't talking about this. I can't believe this wasn't on the front page. And it was. I mean, it wasn't on the front page, but it was in the Washington Post when it came out. But again, silence. So even if the truth comes out, they'll pretend it didn't, and that's the really scary thing. It is about control. There's a quote from, I think it was not Colby. Who came after Colby? The CIA director after him under Reagan. I can't think of his name offhand, but whoever it was had made this quote that I challenged because I'm like, that almost sounds too good to be true. Could he really have said that? And I found that Barbara Honegger was the source of the quote. She heard it personally, and she said that online. And I'm like, wow. But it was basically like, when everything people believe is not true, we will have succeeded. It's like,
Yeah.
they literally want to control how we think, what we think about. And of course, it's really hard now because the internet is here. And so they're trying to find ways to shut it down. And YouTube is censoring videos or hiding views and discouraging content creators. And TikTok, now gets sold to an American company. So the CIA could shut down all those young, passionate voices crying for justice in Gaza. It's anytime something good is happening, they'll try and find a way to smush it
Mm-hmm.
because that's how control works. And I think the thing all world leaders fear is true democracy because, they've been rigging the game for so long. They don't know what would happen if they lost control, and they all feel they'd lose their money. And that's the most important thing to most of our rulers, sadly. So, yeah, it's it's a dark world out there. And this is why I'm laughing, because you have to laugh. It's almost like we're living in an evil cartoon world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the perspective I have to take to stay sane. Because if I, really think about it, it's like we're in a very pretty looking 1984.
Yeah.
But we are living in Orwell's world. And in fact, that novel was originally supposed to be named 1948 because he was describing the world we were already in.
Oh,
And
wow.
the publisher said, that's too scary. We got to change that. So he flipped the last two digits.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're joined by Lisa Pease on the show. And Lisa, I was going to ask you this. You mentioned something brilliantly earlier about like the CIA history. I feel like the kids in school now, I mean, even when I was a kid, you were a kid, I feel like there is some sort of fabricated, compartmentalized like history that we're learning in class and schools that you just mentioned with your comment just now. What's your take? Which to build off what you just talked about, because I'm fascinated by what you just talked about. Are we learning an artificial like history, in your opinion? Are we
Yes.
learning like an artificial
And I think
history?
we always have been. I mean, the whole, George Washington never lied and didn't cut down the cherry tree or whatever. I don't even remember what the story is. But when I was in high school, I remember learning like about our history, and it sounded fake to me even then.
Yeah.
So I didn't have an interest in history because I'm like, whatever they're teaching, that's just BS. And it was like, we're the good guys. Everybody else around the world is bad guys. And whatever the US does is right. Whatever anybody else does is wrong. And I knew that's not how the world works. We're all flawed human beings. We all have our good and dark sides, and countries must have good and dark sides. And so I was always fascinated by the history I wasn't being taught, which is, obviously what led me down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But then, once I started getting into this case, it explained my current world so much better. I mean, I felt like I could see through the headlines and through the current events, and studying the assassination. I mean, when there was that attempt on Trump, where he supposedly got shot in the ear, it's like that whole scene doesn't make sense to me. And if I had time and money and was much younger, I would prove that that kid did not shoot Trump, and that it was a shooter somewhere else who shot him. and then that kid was killed as the patsy for it. I don't know. It's like the patterns are so stark and they're there. I mean, he had no motive. There's no way he had a gun in his pants and then jumped off the roof like we saw. I mean, would have killed himself with a gun up his pants and jump like that, you know. Or if not killed himself, at least sterilized himself for life. You know, it's just like, it's just no way.
Right.
And and yet the media report this like unquestioningly. And I remember like seeing, I've looked into like Roswell and UFOs, and I've never believed it was stuff off planet. I just think it's stuff that's technology we don't know about. Although I will say I've met CIA pilots who say we know they're UFOs because we're already flying the top secret stuff and we can't explain what we're seeing. So there's that. But I'll never forget a broadcast I saw where, because there were stories of bodies found at Roswell. And so these reporters were with straight expressions reading this news story about how it wasn't alien bodies found at Roswell, it was crash dummies. And you could see them like almost trying not to laugh because it's so ludicrous. It's like, who would ever mistake a broken up crash dummy for a live alien being? No one would make that mistake.
No.
And finally, one of the reporters just kind of lost it. And it's like when they tell stories like that, then I start to think, God, maybe aliens really did fall at Roswell.
Right.
Because that's really the dumbest explanation I've heard yet. It's like, why would they have to go to such lengths to make something up if nothing was found at Roswell? And now they're trying to explain it away as crash dummies, and then they show the crash dummies. It doesn't look like an alien being. It looks like a crash dummy. Oh my God. So anyway, it's, if you whenever I hear a news story, my first reaction now is I wonder if that's true. It's not like, oh, that's what happened. It's always, I wonder if that's true. And if I could impart anything to your listeners today, I would ask you to listen to every major news story with, I wonder if that's true. Because it might be. And a lot of times it probably is. But a lot of times it really isn't. And it's not, sometimes it's not even close to what really happened. So it's always good to start with that question and not just let things permeate your brain, because I spent many years just absorbing all the propaganda, and it's taken many years to like pull that back out and look at it and go, wow, that wasn't true.
Yeah. But, even I think Tim Douglas's new book, it has been great. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it yet, but
Not yet. I haven't.
just those four murders, right? Which, are often, grouped together. So JFK, RFK, Malcolm X, and MLK. Once you peel back just a little bit on that, you can't help but wonder about everything else, right? And then you see the continuity of, like we've already spoken about, with the CIA into Iran Contra, the folks in Watergate. So you can't help but wonder every time you see something, right? That you're like, well,
right.
These all were lies. Like, why would they turn around and start telling the truth now?
Exactly.
What are they not capable of if they were capable of that?
Right. And they're, like I said, the fact that they're still lying about it, and of course, Sirhan is still alive and still innocent and still freeable if enough people understood what really happened. So that's kind of my personal mission, and I didn't start the book to free Sirhan. I mean, that was not my goal in writing it. I just wanted to really know what happened. And then the more I got into it, I'm like, people need to know this stuff. I think I'm the only one who knows some parts of this story. And so I felt compelled to get it out there and write it. But as I was writing it, I also realized, oh my God, this man is really innocent. He really couldn't have killed Robert Kennedy. For those who don't know the case, Sirhan was in front of Kennedy when Kennedy was shot from behind at a distance of not more than an inch. And Sirhan was 3 feet in front of him. If Sirhan was firing bullets, Kennedy would have had a bullet hole in his chest. That's because his gun was level, and that would have been where the shot would have gone. There were no shots in the front of Kennedy. He was shot 4 times from behind. 2 of them were from under the armpit, but from behind, going back to front and right to left. And the person standing at his right was a security guard named Thane Eugene Caesar, who happened to work for Robert Mayhew at the time. And when Mayhew was serving Howard Hughes, Thane Caesar was also Howard Hughes's bodyguard. And John Meyer, who knew them both, he knew Mayhew, and he had, encountered Caesar a few times. When he learned he was in the pantry and he mentioned it, Mayhew threatened him. He's like, "Don't you ever talk about Thane Caesar again." And, kind of threatened his life. And so he didn't for many years until I met with him up in Vancouver one time, because I wrote an article about him after reading his book, Age of Secrets, and noticing that Lynn Schoenfeld, another one of these FBI guys who testified to the Warren Commission, was also involved in his case. And I'm like, well, Schoenfeld is like the typical cover-up guy they send in, because Meyer was framed for a murder charge. And if you meet the guy, there's no way he could murder. He's like the nicest guy ever. I mean, he's just super nice. And a jokester. I mean, there's not a malicious bone in his body. And so, yeah, anyway, it's the links that they can go to is pretty terrifying. And, I'm grateful I'm not better known, because if I were, maybe somebody had set me up on a murder charge.
Well,
and I would never kill a soul. I don't even like killing bugs, although I will if I have to, but.
Well, we mentioned at the beginning, you've got a second edition or a new edition or new information in the Lie Too Big to Fail coming out. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what this new information, or not but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually used, there was a really good article in the Washington Post written about my book, and people mistakenly called it a book review. It was not a book review. It was breaking news. Because I told a friend at work, I said, when my book comes out, I'm literally breaking news, because I tied Mayhew to the case for the first time. And so Tom Jackman at the Washington Post really dug into that and wrote this great expose and called the CIA. And yes, Mayhew did work for Howard Hughes, and the CIA wouldn't comment on their relationship with the Hughes organization, even though it's long been outed. At one point, Howard Hughes basically asked the CIA for help because he was trying to buy an airline and the government was sabotaging his efforts. He's like, "Look, I'll help you if you help me. You get me your airline, you can use my money to fund your operations." And so that was kind of the deal. But of course, the greedy CIA didn't stop there, and I think they drugged him to death, and then they had to keep him alive on paper an extra year until they got a hold of all his assets. That's a whole story in itself that really needs to be in a movie. But anyway, this is not only from John Meyer. Gordon Novell said the same thing in a letter to Mary Farrell, that Hughes was dead for a year before he was really dead, because the CIA hadn't gotten control of all the assets yet. So it's like, and even the coroner, I looked it up, the coroner said when Hughes's body was finally, returned to the U.S., because supposedly he died in the Bahamas, he's like, wow, the body looked like it'd been dead a lot longer than they say. He was supposedly in a cryogenic chamber that he had originally had John Meyer purchase for him when he sent him to Europe, because he had hoped to live forever. Yeah.
As if Hughes wasn't weird enough.
I can't even believe the stuff that happens in this world. It's just so beyond our normal experience. Anyway, so I write about some of that in the book. I also talk about people who've studied the JFK assassination and Garrison's case know that it was Jim Phelan who kind of stabbed Garrison in the back. He had previously written a really nice article about him. So Garrison invited James Phelan, the reporter for the Saturday Evening Post, to come to the trial and talk to people. Little did he know that James Phelan would then go home and host gatherings for the other journalists and give them the spin and tell them everything that had happened at the trial that day, so they would all write the story from his perspective. And, people are lazy. It's like, if he's going to tell me what happened, I don't need to go myself, So he became, and it turned out he was not only an FBI informant, but he was a good friend of Robert Mayhew. And I was the first person to expose that online. And James Phelan called me furious about this. And he wasn't furious that I had outed him as an FBI informant. He was furious that I tied him to Mayhew. And
Really?
yeah, and it's funny because I got it out of a book where Mayhew's name was misspelled. But when he said it was the Desert Inn and it was Las Vegas, I'm like, well, that's Robert Mayhew, Maheu. In
Right.
the book that they were linked in, it was Mayhew. It was like phonetic spelling, which might be why no other researcher noticed it, but I knew it was the same guy.
Yeah.
And he didn't deny knowing Mayhew. He was just threatening me, and he threatened to sue me. And so I write about this in the addendum. And then when that didn't work, because I said, you know what, sue me. I said, I'd love to get you under discovery. I'd love to learn more about your background. And so I end up getting off the phone with him. And like 20 minutes later, David Lifton calls me. Hey, James Phelan's a really good friend of mine. You should listen to him. And, he's not a bad guy. And then David Lifton's going on with all this stuff about how he just happened to catch the last plane out of Cuba before the revolution went down. And I'm thinking, so Lifton's a spook too?
What in the world?
That would explain so much. And Roselli was his doorman for a while. It's like, these guys, they're all linked together. So anyway, I talk about some of that. So there's some JFK stuff in there. And I talk about some new evidence that I found. And I talk about a FOIA case that honestly I thought I'd written up in the book, but my dad was dying as I was finishing my last chapter. And so it's probably much weaker than it would have been if I'd written it at another time. But there was a lawyer up in San Francisco who had FOIA'd the CIA about Hank Hernandez and about, oh God, who's the guy in the JFK case that a lot of people think was one of the shooters who said, we got him in Dallas. Anyway, if I said his name, you would know it. It's in the book.
Morales?
But yeah, Morales. Yeah, the lawyer had FOIA'd Morales and Hernandez and a few others. And the CIA's initial response on Hernandez was operational records are kept secret. And there's nothing that is FOIA ready, basically, for Hernandez. So it was almost like a complete confirmation that Hernandez had worked for the CIA. And then they gave the same response to Thane Caesar. It was like the person at CIA responding didn't realize these people were connected to these major assassinations.
Okay.
I was just saying, yeah, they're operational files, but those aren't subject to FOIA. So then the guy goes back and tries to get more, say, well, if they're operational files, these are the JFK Records Act and this and that. And then they're like, oh, we will neither confirm or deny that we have any of these files.
It got forwarded to the right person to go
Yeah,
out.
exactly.
Yeah.
Some alarm bell got tripped, and then it went up the chain. So, but yeah, sometimes you get lucky. If they don't know they're supposed to lie, they don't always lie. That's the trick. So,
or they do a good job lying for the rest of their lives. In my opinion, I mean. So when we had the task force this past year come out with, I thought the second hearing was really super important with Hardaway and Doug Horn and everybody that was there. I do think that they should have scheduled a third one, and it's too bad that Ruth Payne is not here anymore, because if they would have granted her immunity, I feel like, she probably
never know.
Yeah.
Even if they granted her immunity, she has such pride in her secret life, and she giggles when she talks about it. It's like she knows she's getting away with this, and she will not. It's like, I think because she's a hardcore CIA agent who just would rather go to their death. I mean, I had a boss recently who worked for the CIA at an accounting firm, and he was like, I will take your secrets to the grave with me. That's who I am. And it's like a personal point of pride for them not to tell the truth. And, remember Richard Helms, after perjuring himself before Congress during the Church Committee hearings, and he's like, that's a badge of honor. I lied to protect the agency,
Yeah.
So it's, there's a reason Victor Marchetti called his book The Cult of
Yeah.
intelligence, because it is like a cult. It's a cult of secrecy. And
Precisely.
anything goes as long as you keep the secrets. And this is, by the way, one of the biggest things I think people just don't understand, because people are like, oh, if that many people were involved, somebody would have talked. It's like, well, first of all, a lot of people were involved that didn't know they were involved until after the fact, and then they definitely weren't going to talk.
Yeah.
And then again, you can't get a job at the CIA if you can't be a really good liar. That is like job criteria number one. So if you can't lie and you can't keep secrets, you're never going to work there. And if you do work there, nothing you should say should ever be taken as the gospel truth unless there's other corroborating evidence. It's just that simple.
Yeah. I mean, that's my feelings on Felix Rodriguez. I still feel like he's giving us a line of BS today. But the other person I wanted to get your opinion on was Buell Wesley Frazier with that BS curtain rod story. Okay. Now, I you know, for him to be, you know, Fritz to come up with this pre-typed confession, okay, allegedly. There's so many, I could say allegedly the whole show.
Yeah.
but I mean, I still feel like this guy's holding something back. Maybe he's an agent. I don't know. But I mean, this is a great question to ask you.
Yeah, I've had that thought that maybe he's an agent. I think it's more likely that somewhere along the way somebody made him a really good deal. And for example, Vincent DiPiero, who is not an agent, but he's terrified to talk about the RFK assassination. So I said something like, I tried to search your address in Google and nothing came up. He goes, oh yeah, that's part of my deal with the FBI. And I'm like, what deal with the FBI?
Wow.
And I gathered it was because, and he told me a little bit, you know, but it's basically he was so terrified that he might be killed for witnessing a lone assassin that, because he'll tell you Sirhan did it and Sirhan did it alone. That's his story and he's sticking to it. But he's terrified, and he almost didn't talk to me. His girlfriend thought I might kill him or something, or you know, he finally did meet with me. It's like, yeah, I'm like the most harmless person in the world. I have to laugh when I hear stuff like that. Anyway, so I think that's what they do. They scare people, and then it's like, we'll protect you, but you really can't talk about that anymore. You know, as long as you don't talk, we will make sure no one kills you. You'll live out your life. You know, so it's not so much like a threat. It's more like this warm, cozy little blanket of protection that makes them feel safe. It's a smart tactic, and I'm sure the CIA does the same sort of thing, you know. So I think that's how they silence some of these people. And maybe they do go on to work for. I mean, Vincent DiPiero got a job as a script doctor, even though I don't think he's ever sold a script of his own. So it's like, how do you get a job like that? You're supposed to be a really good writer to get a job like that, but maybe that's his payoff for keeping silent about some of the other stuff he might have seen that night, you know. Anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, because Vince was the one who said this blonde girl with the cast and the green dress and the yellow lemons. He goes, that was a girl. That's what he told them in court. And, you know, I showed him the photos of dark-haired women, and I showed him his own original statement where he said the woman was a dark-haired brunette in a white dress with dark polka dots, and he's like, yeah, it wasn't the same girl. I'm like, then why did you say it was? He's like, well, he showed me these photos, and I thought they were just trying to trip me up, that maybe these were police women in the photo, and I picked out the one that wasn't police woman. He's like really proud of himself. Like, I found somebody who really was in the pantry. And I'm like, but she wasn't the girl.
Right.
You know? And it's kind of like, well, that's what they wanted me to say.
Now,
people.
The girl with the polka dot dress is all over the story right now.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been a real good identification of who we think that might have been, or did she sort of fade in?
And I think she was on a plane to Beirut that night, and I'm pretty sure John Corey took her to the airport while he was ostensibly picking up his wife there. I write about that a little bit in the book, but like so much of the JFK case, I think she's a distraction. You know, it's like Everybody wants to know who the girl is. It doesn't freaking matter. Sirhan didn't do it. Therefore, the story is false. Therefore, we're being lied to. Therefore, it's important to find out what really happened. And yeah, she might be a part of what really happened. She's not the story. It's like how many bullets were fired, or where were they fired from in Dealey Plaza? It's like it's who paid for the bullets. That's what matters. So similar, yeah, I get frustrated because I've had so many people call me over the years and talk my ear off. I found the girl in the polka dot dress, and here's why. And I used to listen to them. I used to listen for hours to these people, and none of them ever ended up, proving out. So I just stopped. Now if somebody says, "Oh, I know who it is," it's like, yeah, write your own book, and any good I'll read.
Yeah,
Because most of the time it's just BS. Yeah, time and stuff.
Yeah. We're what, like many other programs, we said anybody brings up the James File story, we're like, we don't want to talk to you ever again.
Right.
Talk to us.
Oh my God, that's how I met Bobby Kennedy Jr., by the way. It was because of the James File story.
Really?
He was calling for that. And he was a friend of David Talbot's for a very long time, which I didn't know until this call. David Talbot calls me one night. He's like, "Lisa, I got a real problem. I'm hoping you can help." He's like, "I'm a friend of Bobby Kennedy Jr." I'm like, "What?" And he's like, he really thinks James Files did it, and I can't talk him down from it. And I'm like, "Give him to me." I said, "We actually wrote about this in Probe magazine. I know this story. I'll talk about it." And it was harder than I thought because Bobby's like, his story's internally consistent. It's this, it's that. And I'm like, but it's not true. I said, and I'll prove it to you. And so sure enough, a few days later, a little Googling is like, all right, the bullet shell that he said he bit into and left in the Dealey Plaza. Well, the markings on that shell show it was manufactured in 1972. Therefore, he couldn't have used it in 1963 to shoot Kennedy. Therefore, he's a liar. Therefore, you shouldn't believe anything else he says. And Bobby did believe me. And in that call, I said, and by the way, I know your father never tried to have Castro killed. And he's like, I know that too. I actually talked to Castro about that. And so we had a bonding moment over that.
Nice.
And after that, then he invited me over to his house to talk about the RFK case. But yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, he believed Paul Schrade, who insisted to his dying day that Sirhan had shot Paul, but not Robert Kennedy. It's like if Sirhan had any bullets in his gun, his first shot would have hit Robert Kennedy in the chest. He had a wide open shot. No one realized he had a gun in it until it was too late. And his first shot did not hit Paul Schrade. That was somebody else's shot. And it's probably the guy on the table being jostled, anyway, which I encourage people to read about. There were at least 4 shooters in the pantry, and I identify them in my book, not by name, but by position and looks. And another guy in a blue suit ran one of the guns out into the hallway. Looks like there was a handoff to another guy who then jumped a hedge and disappeared into the night with it. Well, Michael Wayne seemed to definitely be involved, and I talk a lot about him. So anyway, yeah, it's a completely different story. We were told that there was never any other shooter seen besides Sirhan. Absolutely not true. It's all over the witness accounts, and they're consistent and they match each other. I know people say witness accounts aren't that credible. Well, they can be, and in fact, studies have shown that in highly stressful situations, sometimes your memory improves because you're paying more attention. Now, if you're being personally threatened, your memory may be worse. But if you're in a stressful environment, like watching somebody else get shot, your memory can be enhanced by that. And so I found it stunning how many of the witnesses described exactly the same set of events from their vantage point, what they could see. And all of them agreed of the 4 who saw Kennedy and Sirhan at the moment of the shooting, all 4 put them facing each other and about the gun muzzle about 3 feet from Kennedy. So Sirhan standing close to 6 feet from Kennedy, but the gun muzzle 3 feet from him. Therefore, he could not have killed him. Again, if I had just one eyewitness, that's one thing. But when you have 4 credibly all describing the same sequence of events, that's a fact to me. You know?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's something nice that we don't necessarily have in JFK, where we have a lot of witnesses of.
Well, I would
different things,
disagree
right?
with that. I disagree with that.
You
I
disagree?
I believe the railroad guys that were standing up on the bridge up there, their stories were consistent with Mark Lane, that they saw a puff of smoke from that area there. So where there's smoke, there's fire. And then if you see all those people running up the hill, I mean, they felt something from that area up there. They had to have. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have that. That's just my opinion.
I agree with you there. I think had in my mind all the witnesses of outside of the TSBD, right?
Yeah.
So we have a man in a suit, we
Yes.
have a Hispanic man or a bald black man, and somebody, Howard Brennan sees Oswald in an 18-inch window. So we have all, but in the RFK,
Howard Brennan didn't see anything. I think Howard Brennan just made
I
that.
agree.
Yep.
I agree, but
yeah.
wow.
But anyway, it can be very confusing. It makes it tough and makes it easy to get away with other narratives. And I've often wondered if Brennan was maybe a spook, put there to, identify Oswald, because somebody had to see him in the window, see him in the window.
Yeah.
Well, I think is it Bill Simpich who did a great job on the physical description, right? Going through the FBI file, exactly what Howard Brennan reported, and then scanned out on the DPD radios.
Yeah.
Matches Oswald when he was killed 2 days later, was 30 pounds less and a couple inches shorter.
Yeah, exactly.
But that
hardly
5'11", 165, it only shows up in these government files and then out of Howard Brennan's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, and they mentioned on the radio that the guy was older too, like 30, right? So like they said the guy was like 5'11", 30 years old, dark wavy hair. Oswald was balding, short, really thin,
Mm-hmm.
It just, like Lisa says, the inconsistencies with everything. It just, So, but so we're excited about your book. We want our audience to really go on to Amazon and either pick it up or get the Audible on it. Again, it's called A Lie Too Big to Fail. I have another question. I'm sure Eli has another one for you. But my question is, because you've unearthed a lot of the secrets on the RFK assassination, would it be fair of me to ask you, could we be able to solve this thing publicly with in the current climate that we're in right now? Because obviously it seems like there's so much obvious evidence with the RFK assassination, right? I mean,
honestly, I think one of the biggest obstacles to solving the case is sadly the Kennedy family themselves.
Oh,
Bobby has made himself not credible because of so many things he has said over the years in various cases, and things. So he's kind of out, and the rest of the family, it's like they stopped reading after, pretty much after it happened. One guy who they knew, Jules Whitcover, wrote a book that was basically, the CIA's line of, Sirhan did it. And of course, their mother was in the pantry, the Ethel was there and she saw Sirhan take it away. So of course, in her mind, Sirhan shot her husband, and there's no question she didn't personally see any other shooter, therefore there weren't any other shooters. It's they will never let Sirhan go free, and they made that clear at his last parole hearing, because at 2 parole hearings ago, Bobby wrote a really good letter to the board, and then he appeared on camera and pled for Sirhan's release, and Sirhan was granted parole. And then the next time around, the governor vetoed it, and that is Gavin Newsom, who a lot of people love, because he's running for president. I can't stand the guy because he's a fake progressive, not a real progressive. And I say that as somebody who can't stand Trump. It's like I don't want the fascists to win, but Gavin's one of them. Even though he's a Democrat, he's part of that high-tech cabal, if you will, that is currently running our country, and the Peter Thiel types. It's like that's who funds Gavin Newsom. So anyway, I digress. Anyway, after that hearing, at the next hearing, 2 of the Kennedy children, Kerry Kennedy and is it Chris? I forget which one, also showed up to say Sirhan did it. We all know he did it. Don't let him out. He should be in jail forever. And, the sad thing is in California, if you commit a crime before the age of 24, you're supposed to be paroled in later life. One, they found that older people don't commit crimes. Older people can't run away, so it's like they're very unlikely to shoot you. It's just doesn't happen.
Mhm.
And the prison systems are overcrowded, so they like to get people out. And they found that brains aren't fully formed until about age, 26, I think is the cutoff. And Serrano was only 24 at the time. Anyway, so all the facts of the case show he should have been paroled. Even if he were guilty, he should have been paroled. And of course, the fact that he's innocent just adds to the fact that he should have been paroled. But yeah, it's funny because Gavin Newsom, after that verdict came out, Gavin Newsom dropped off the radar in California. And it was so noticeable that he was gone. People were speculating, does he have COVID? Where is he? And I'm like, he ran back to Langley to ask them how to respond because he wants to run for president. Now, that's just speculation on my point. But I think that's how it works. It's like, and they're like, hey, yeah, 6 hands parole, and, we'll make sure you get your chance to run for president. No promises, but you'll get to run.
Well, you would think, in your golden years, the last thing you'd want to do when you're released from prison is to go out and like snuff somebody.
Yeah, right.
Wouldn't you just be like, I would just enjoy my time eating this Subway and going for long walks on the beach and all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's all Serrano wants to do is be able to sit and look at the sky, walk, help his brother out who's practically blind, and he can't do much these days. Who's, by the way, his mind is really sharp. His brother Munir, I've had many talks with him, and super interesting guy, a very nice guy, and always just, I don't know, just a delightful person. And it gives you a sense of who the brother must have been, and they're very close. And of course, that's all Serrano has. It's the only family member left, so they talk all the time. And Serrano was reading my book and then almost got his throat slashed. And in the process of going to the hospital, when he came back, his book was gone. So it's just horrible. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
I bet that probably scared you a little bit hearing that story.
Yeah, well, it didn't scare me. I mean, go ahead and slash my throat. I'm old. I've had a good life. It's like,
Well, I mean, if you send him a copy of the book and then he gets killed because he's reading it.
That would be
pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't think he was killed because he was reading it, but I do think somebody took it out of his cell.
Yeah. Well,
because he found out. Yeah, one of the things that he thought was stunning. He's like, they had the wrong gun at the trial. There was a third gun, and I guess there really was. So, anyway.
I wanted to ask you. Sorry,
after you, I got one more because I mean, like, we're only going to get this opportunity for now. So I just want to ask her one after you. So,
all right. We've heard rumors, Tim and I, of a potential RFK hearing at the Luna Committee. Have you heard anything about that? And would you be testifying?
I would love to testify. I think I probably know more than any living person about the case. So if they didn't ask me to testify, I would know they weren't interested in the truth. But no one has invited me, or I mean, I've just heard rumors about this. So
okay.
And and Jeff Morley and I have had our run-ins over the years, but I was actually very impressed with the way he handled himself at the JFK hearing that he spoke at. So that was a good thing. But and I and he were both trying to get Dan Hardaway there to the first hearing, and Dan absolutely refused. And it wasn't until he saw that the panel was treated somewhat with respect, because I think he was afraid of being ridiculed as a conspiracy theorist or put down, or having some CIA guy come in and shoot them all in the face, or whatever. So they all lived. So he agreed to testify, at the second hearing. So, but he's told me a few times, Dan, that he's kind of done with this. It's, he's like, I spent most of my life trying to get the truth out. It's frustrating. And I guess, to me, it's less important what happened as the fact that it was a cover-up, and it's still a cover-up, and they're still covering it up to this day, and files are still disappearing. I was told there were 3 Sirhan files, the 201 file, and 2 different Office of Security files. And those are the ones I'm most interested in because the Office of Security is where the mind control experiments were. Now, I do know most of the mind control experiment records were destroyed. But if there's 2 Office of Security files on Sirhan, I want to see them. They have not yet been released. So I know they're there because I heard from somebody that they were found, but where are they? And, I was told the CI's only giving us 1 copier and we have to insert blue sheets between each file. And it's a long waiting list to get to that one scanner that does this. And I'm like, yeah, it's because they want to read and get in front of anything that's coming out that they need to explain away or just delete the records. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, I would love to testify because I know there are files there that are important, and I know the CI was involved. Like I said, it's important that it come out, but it's also important that Sirhan go free. If he didn't do it, he didn't do it. And like I said, even though Lee Harvey Oswald is dead, he didn't do it. History owes him that. We have to start from that point. Oswald didn't do it because people who are afraid to say that shouldn't even be researching, in my opinion.
I agree.
You're just wasting space.
Yeah. Go to Dairy Queen and read Case Closed. But my last question to you is to branch off Eli's question, and it's the task force in general. Okay, so with all phases other than Malcolm's, which is unfortunate, but with the task force, I do see it as important. But at the end of the day, this is my opinion. I'm looking for your answer on that. My opinion, unless they have vested people like in the church committee and in the House committee assassination that they had in the 70s, you're not going to get serious traction with either thing going on. It's just a topic, in my opinion. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I have 2 thoughts. 1, I agree with you, but 2, every CIA document we get tells us something about the world we live in and tells us something about the way the CIA operates. And any file we get about the FBI, same thing. And so even though we may not get the files that we think are there, or there's no document anywhere that's going to say, oh, we hired so-and-so to kill President Kennedy and here's the pay stub. Those kind of files just don't exist, right? Bill Harvey's rule, nothing on paper, so I don't know what people expect to find, but the amount of sheer history we're learning and some of the side plots and other things that were going on in the world, I think are super important. And so as many files as we can get, whenever we get a chance like this, we should be greedy and grab for all we can get. I have no illusions that it's going to save the world or change the planet or free Sirhan even, but get them while you can, because there are only a few opportunities in history where the files are open for anything. So I think it's important that we seize the moment. And I wish more JFK researchers would look at the RFK files. Burt O'Neill shows up in both of them. It's like there's some key people that, show up across both cases. And when people ignore one and study the other, it's like, to me, it's the same plot. Because the whole reason Bobby was killed was to make sure he didn't figure out that the CIA killed his brother and do something about it when he got to be president, as he surely would have. Bobby was a really good researcher. It's one of the ways he made his life in the Senate. He was on these Senate investigative committees, and he really dug in and did the work. He was a good researcher. He would have figured out the CIA killed his brother. It was his first suspicion. When Bobby got the call that JFK had been shot in Dallas, first call he made was to the CIA, got the duty officer, and said, "Did you guys kill my brother?" That was his first instinct, because he knows how the world works. Yeah. And of course, John McCone, who was a personal friend, came out and said, "Oh no, we didn't kill him. Of course not. I swear on my mother's grave, that this didn't happen." And of course, Bobby may have believed him at that point, but he kept some of his friends on the, keep looking at the CIA. He made them go retrace Oswald's steps in Mexico City. He was going to figure it out. So of course they killed him. So, people would say like, oh, the mob killed them both. There's no way. The mob could not have gotten away with this without intelligence help. And LBJ, why would he kill Bobby? If he killed JFK, you could make the case because he wanted to be president. Well, then why did he step down as soon as Bobby entered the race and then kill him? That would make no sense, So when you treat them as the same thing, it gets rid of all the bogus theories, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah. And this is why, again, the further back you can pull to look at all the events going on in that era and all the leaders being overthrown and people being killed and leftists being jailed, that tells you kind of the broader story.
Absolutely.
And they fit right in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa Pease is our guest, and we're honored to have her on today. You've been a wealth of information, and just please pick up her book on Amazon.com or your other book retailers as well. It's called A Lie Too Big to Fail. Also, get the Audible if you can. If you're working out or anything like that, please do check that out. So, Lisa, basically what we do with every show is we do our final takes, and the hosts go first, and then we have our guests go last with their final takes. So if that's okay with you, we'll get started with that. So first and foremost, Lisa, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. This has been just an intriguing and fascinating interview. We appreciate your time. I'm going to be pushing out your book to my friends and family for sure, because it has been such a privilege, and I just wanted to thank you on a personal note. So thank you for taking the time to do this, and thank you for joining our show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Like I said at the beginning, it's sort of a little bit wide of where we normally go, and I think that's been awesome. Like you said, to step back and to see the events of the 60s with sort of a wider lens is very helpful. I believe Tim kind of talked at the beginning about the events of the Cold War. When you start looking at JFK, and then you have to step back and say, okay, what's going on in the Cold War? So all these things are so important now. And I would also mention to the viewers that Lisa has a lot of great articles on Kennedy's and King, and they have the back issues of Probe magazine. So she's got tons of great work out there in addition to the book, which you should buy and read.
And I will probably be starting a Substack, at least, maybe a podcast. So we'll see.
Oh, right.
Oh, that'd be great.
I might have to hit you up for like, what software do you use? What equipment do you use?
We're still figuring that out.
Yeah, everybody does it a different way. So anyway, well, thank you both so much. You had very informed questions. You're delightful people, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much. And again, we appreciate this. And please, again, pick her book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, on Amazon, or it's at Barnes & Noble as well. And you can pick it up at any of your book retailers. Please do. So
even the indies, if you go into an independent bookstore that you like and ask them to order it for you, they will. So yeah, support any bookstore you love.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on your retirement, and we look forward to your future projects, and hopefully we can have you back on again. This has been such a joy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sure we can do it again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's Lisa Pease. Thank you so much. And like I tell our audience every episode, the truth is out there. We'll see you next episode.